Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Should we just take a couple of questions?
Okay. I have, well, I'll draw from your, the Heidelberg thesis that you allow, that you sort of use Western paradigms in analysis of social movements in the East, India, etc. Now, there seems to me certain similarities in the way you describe the deconstructed the evolution of Hindutva to what probably happened in Germany itself. I mean, originally nationalism without thinking, a nation without thinking. Then you had Johann Fichte and his address to the German nation, which is very much like what Savarkar's the idea, evolving from Sprachnation, Kulturnation, cultural nation, language nation, eventually leading to a romantic nationalism with Goethe and Immanuel Kant, etc. I mean, but what it led to eventually was something which was conservative, reactionary, anti-Catholic, anti-liberal, and anti-socialist. That is how it evolved, leading to 1866. Now mark these watershed points: Hindu-Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, Prussia, Austria. These differences, the war. Eventually, why would you say that the eventual fruition of this development would not be what happened in Germany? So dispel my fears. I mean, your conclusion is that everything is, in consonance with democratic norms. We have seen this kind of thing evolve in Germany till, say, 1932 or so, very democratic, etc. And then what happened? So this kind of evolution, the ultimate fruition could be something that is very destabilizing. So this is an antithesis, what you see.
Is there any immediate question? Yes.
I've got a couple of questions, one of which sort of follows on from this. So I'll begin with that question. And also on the idea that Hindutva nationalism is strengthening the democracy, is that it is also producing counter social movements, say in the practice of promotion of Hindi as a national language. It's promoting counter social movements in Tamil Nadu, in the East, and so on and so forth. So we also know that there's an argument to be made that the clash of social movements and conflict, whether it's manifesting in a low intensity or in a big way, is also destabilizing to democracy. So that is a follow-on from the first question. And if I could ask a couple of more questions, is, I'm not an expert on social movement, but based on my limited reading of, say, the classical literature around social movement, Charles Tilly and Sidney Tarrow and so on and so forth, there is a preponderance of grievances for the sustainability of a movement, whether it's deprivation or relative deprivation. And given that this is a country of 80% Hindu, from the framework that you've presented, my understanding is that you're suggesting that this unity is the grievance. So is this big enough a grievance that sustains this movement? And my feeling is that there's also this, in the process of nation building, the idea that unity in diversity has become very popular. And my last question is, given that Hinduism is not a proselytizing religion, how does this Hindu Rashtra idea fit, say, in the northeast India or in Jammu and Kashmir, two of the areas where you don't have a Hindu majority population?
Okay, we'll just stop for this round. Excellent questions for Dr. Siegfried to respond to.
Just 1 second. So, I mean, as we had this conversation before regarding the influence of Western paradigms. One of my main arguments is, for example, that Hindutva is not necessarily an Indian concept. when you go to Savarkar, you have to understand that he was heavily influenced by European Western ideas.
Yeah, that is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
But the ultimate result was we know what happened in Germany.
So, and I mean, he was mainly influenced by, I don't know it, by Mazzini. So, Savarkar was more looking on, of course, on the concept of nation, what brings a nation together, what holds a nation together. So, and also his the idea of rationality. He was also very strong influenced by utilitarianism. So, and only partly he took ideas from Indian philosophy. So actually, Savarkar was not so deep involved in that. So therefore, I would say Hindutva is rather a Western concept than a really deep-rooted in classical Indian philosophy. So regarding your question of how far, I'm not totally sure if I got it right. Your question was...
No, I'm agreeing with you so far. That
Yeah.
is my point. It's Western. But eventually it led to National Socialism in Germany. So why are you concluding differently that in India it's not going to lead to what National Socialism in Germany is going to be different? So that is my question. Everything is same. You know, Mazzini, Fichte, Herder, Kant.
I mean,
Then National Socialism was the ultimate fruition both in Italy, both in Mazzini's Italy and Fichte's Germany. But why should it be different in India then?
No, actually, there's Frank Swingman. I know only that Savarkar was not in favor of. This is a big mistake. Savarkar could also always compare to the Nazi regime, but he made clearly that he's not in favor of that.
Yeah, that is his statement.
But frankly, there's no answer to that question. I mean, there is a permanent threat. I mean, when you look at this Risorgimento in Italy, or Fichte had all this unification movement in Germany, there is no doubt that this the spirit was the base for Hindu nationalism. For National Socialism. Yeah? They were heavily drawing on these ideas. Of course, they didn't have the idea to implement a National Socialist state, yeah? But National Socialists were implemented. And therefore, there's no guarantee that the Hindu nationalist movement might get the same ideas. This we have to see. But this might be the case, but not necessarily. But it's open. So you can't really answer the question. But Hindutva would provide for that. Yeah. Regarding the question of social movements, of course there's a possibility of counter-social movements, but at the moment I don't see so much counter-social. Of course you have to, when you see the Congress, yeah, as a counter-social movement, and you have affiliate organizations, but I don't see any social movement in India at the moment who could really catch up in terms of organization structure, manpower, influence with the Hindu nationalist movement. I mean, here and there you have some short protesting. I can, unfortunately, I forgot the name of the. Perhaps there was this. Some years ago, with this. As the Hindu nationalists were destroying the set of one of the movie makers who made this water fire. So there are always some minor local protest movement against the Hindu nationalists. Say, okay, you can't do that. Yeah? But still, I don't think this is so strong. What holds the movement together, of course, in the case of Hindu nationalism, this is quite strong because I didn't have so much time to go into that issue. I was indicating this a little bit in my presentation that, for example, Savarkar was used actually a kind a matrix of different codes, yeah, to implement or to construct the Hindutva concept. So this was covering his notion about strong economy, also the notion of citizenship, for example, and this, social reform programs. But within what, so he offered actually a buffet, yeah, of interpreting Hindutva. So, for example, it's still possible, for example, to create a strong, or implement a strong economic policy, but ignoring at the same time these hardcore demands like, oh, we have to get rid of this special status for Kashmir, or we have to kick out all or attack the minorities. So, so it's still within this Hindutva ideology. You can focus on certain issues. Interesting is not many people know that when you go to Savarkar writing, he by himself, I mean, you know that he had this he had a switch in his thinking and writing. So when you look at his books like 1857, he was quite in favor of the Hindu-Muslim community unity, that we should struggle together. So this earlier writing, he tried to implement as much as possible religious communities, minorities. So what you find, for example, when you go to his writings, there's this famous sentence that for a minority to be Indian, so he says the three definitions, it's three criteria to be a citizen, a Hindu. Is you come and you need to have Hindu parents, you have to be born in India, and you have to accept the Hindu culture. So this is the most tricky thing for the minorities, because his point was your holiest place has to be in India, which means, of course, for Christians it's a problem, for Muslims also a problem, because the most holy place are somewhere else. But Savarkar by himself was, for example, sometimes when it fits his policies and strategies, he was arguing, well, your holy place has to be in India. Yeah? So he offers already in this direction a continuum between holy and holiest place. So, and therefore, my point is why Hindutva works over the years and was able to hold this movement together, because they had this flexibilities. You had this discussion about the soft and hard Hindutva. So this is expression, but there is not one Hindutva. So it is a little bit, I hope it's a little bit answering the question. And the one thing was why this Hindutva works in this non-Hindu areas. Of course not. I mean, it would fit in this ideology, yeah, to a certain way when they implement an inclusive interpretation of Hindutva. But this is a big problem of the Hindu national movement. And nobody of the Hindu nationalists, when they want to have a Hindu Rashtra, but I never ever found really a concrete idea how a Hindu Rashtra should be conceptualized. They don't talk about the democracy, they don't talk about it should be the kingdom or whatever. They don't talk about which kind of government. Neither Savarkar or other people. They're totally silent in this direction. The only thing which you see sometimes is some reference to the Hindu kingdom of Nepal as the ideal case of Hindu Rashtra.
The next set of questions. Yes, sir.
You referred to many.
So would
points.
you be kind to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Joseph
Nice
from
name.
Alpha and Omega Consultants. I'm sorry I was late. However, one of the points I wanted to ask you about is the dilemma of this Hindu national or national Hindutva. You mentioned several of them. Among the maybe 4 or 5 that you mentioned, I'd like to ask you which will be the most prominent dilemma they are facing today. And you also referred to some examples like 1992, the Ayodhya Mosque, and 2002, the Gujarat riots, and the consequence thereupon. Now you mentioned the rising awareness among the moderate sections of the Hindu people, and also the growing frustration within the party, the group itself. So of all these, the tensions between the radical and moderate groups, among all these, according to you, which will be the most prominent or most important dilemma that faced with? Secondly, is there a possibility that India can become a theocratic state? Given a theocratic state, given the 80% majority, 80% population, Hindus? Do you have any examples in the modern history having a theocratic state with a majority of population belonging to religion?
Any other immediate questions? If not, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question because this leads us to our I think the greatest dilemma. I mean, first of all, we have to say that Prime Minister Modi is in a very relatively pleasant, fortunate position with his landslide victory. I mean, this gives him a lot of power. First, second. He is at the moment, I think there's a process going on that he is able to select people from within the RSS in positions which are in line with him. Nevertheless, I mean, he's definitely in a better position than Vajpayee, who has really to struggle because Vajpayee had this, he was really in the big dilemma, yeah? That he tried to go the moderate line, focus on economic policy, and he got in trouble with the VHP. So, and the RSS was trying to moderate. When it comes to the current situation, I mean, there are already some. The problem with that is not only the issue is what Modi has now to deal with is that, of course, his personal position is stronger than ever before than which a BJP president had. Like Vajpayee in government, but also the RSS are now in a different position. Yeah, I mean the RSS was during Vajpayee time that also their own problems a little bit, and so the Sangh Parivar was they had some internal struggle, but also I think this how I read the current situation is that the Sangh Parivar are in order at the moment. Yeah? So you don't have any more this struggle between the VGP and RSS. I mean, the RSS was giving, I think now, Prime Minister Modi 1 year to bring out some changes. You can see already some tensions. For example, the latest Nepal visit of Prime Minister Modi. So there were some hopes of the Hindu nationalist movement and the radicals that he will more focusing on Hindu nationalist themes, but he totally ignored it. The same happened with, for example, with the Bangladesh issue, that during the election campaign, Modi were mentioned some statements that we have to get rid of illegal migrants from Bangladesh and then we have to get them out to please the radicals. But what happens now is there was no talk at all. So, I mean, this might be a little escape. I think I'm by myself surprised by Prime Minister Modi's strong focus on foreign policy. But the trouble will come when he has to bring out when he has to focus on more domestic issues. I don't think that there, in economic terms, there will be clashes, but the clashes will come when the radicals of the Hindu national movement are not satisfied with policy fields which they can influence. I mean, you have already some issues that a kind of censorship is growing again. Yeah, that I think I could not write now a certain book who would, critical in a certain direction. So I think this would be immediately on the index. And we had this now recently. We had some penguin books got on the index, and law cases were studying. So there's a process going on. But I don't think that Prime Minister Modi will care much about this. So I think this will not challenge his government. So I don't see at the moment any problems. The problem might come when, let's see what happens in Pakistan, with the current issue there, when the Hindu nationalists, the radicals at least, will push to a harder stance in certain directions. So when they try to influence Modi's wish of pushing the economy.
Well, the second part of the question.
And the theocratic state? Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I don't see it. There's no way. Also, frankly speaking, I don't see how they want to implement the theocratic state.
Because looking at the...
As a civil society in India is so strong, I mean, the Hindu nationalist movement is strong, but they will never ever implement such a thing.
Well, India's one constitution is a secular state.
Yeah.
We all understand that. Now, of course, the composition of the present cabinet, predominantly maybe 95% Hindu. I think 1 or 2 Muslims are there, or class 1. I don't see any Hindu, any Christian representation.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody is elected, I don't know. any Christian elected as MP or not. So these are the things that point that could be a potential of a theocratic state.
I mean, we have just some examples to 3 seconds. What is quite interesting now, we are here in Southeast Asia. I mean, we have some tendencies in Sri Lanka, we have Bhutan, of course, but look at Thailand at the moment. What the military is doing there. I see some kind of Buddhization there. You know? Besides the fact that they have other rules and are in power. But watch closely, and this is somehow a mind map. A road map, sorry.
Okay. I have a question. Is there anybody else? Okay, Mr. Surya. Okay, Mr. Surya, why don't we? Okay. I actually, if I could respond to the issue on theocratic state, I think when we look at Savarkar's ideology, in fact, religion itself doesn't figure much. It is religious, political identity possibly, but religion itself, in terms of an interest in any belief system, is not there. I would have gone to the extent of saying that Savarkar himself was not much of a religious figure. And indeed that the counter argument or the strongest move against any idea of a theocratic state is the very fact that there is recognition that there is too great diversity within Hindu ideas, philosophies, thoughts, religious practices themselves to ever bring it together in such a form. I think RSS has never sought, at least insofar as I see it, to try and bring this together in a certain religious frame, and they have tried to stay away from it. VHP attempts to act as a coordinating body, but without dividing, necessarily removing the diversity of different Hindu groups. So it's very difficult to actually conceptualize a theocratic Hindu state as such with certain fundamental beliefs. Ideology of Hindutva does not have it within it to try and do that. But I want to ask a few questions. There are two issues that stood out. One was the conclusion that you draw that 1992 and 2001, when Hindu nationalism shifted towards more hardline acts in the form of Babri Masjid or in the form of the riots in Gujarat, and the conclusion that you drew from that this had negative implications on the BJP politically. I'm not sure this is true. I think from 92 to 96 we see a constant rise of the BJP and then stabilizes, by which time we already see a moderation of the movement. In 2001, in Gujarat itself, certainly electorally there's nothing to suggest that the BJP did any worse than before. Indeed, it went on to hold on to a position of strength. At the central level, one could argue possibly that the failure was because the central BJP was not carrying on and persisting on a hardline stance which the Gujarat government had displayed. So I'm not sure that necessarily that the hardline move leads to an outcome that is negative for the BJP, and that even if we look at the Modi campaign, yes, it's a lot of talk on development, but hidden within it is the figure of Modi itself, who is seen as a hardline figure, B, that he does use imagery, sometimes subtle and otherwise, to reinforce his connection to the more hardline wing, sometimes today represented by Amit Shah. So I'm not sure that conclusion is necessarily correct. The second thing is I want to push you further along the lines of what Dr. Chaudhary raised, because you were quite firm in your conclusion that in the end Hindutva will not affect Indian democracy and lead to and I'm not sure that you can actually derive that conclusion on the basis of the conceptual frame that you have argued. And so I want to push you further on these two issues.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I was one of my conclusions that the BJP suffered from the Gujarat and Ayodhya riots was that this conclusion is drawn on a survey which Professor Mitra did, and in this survey it came out that that actually, in particular, the middle classes, they don't necessarily are against hardline rhetoric, but they're definitely against riots which affects the economy. Yeah? But this means not that necessarily that they're not in favor of at least ideas, but about implementation. Yeah? Meaning that that's strict against militancy.
Okay.
Regarding the last election, I think there are different dimensions. You are right, yeah. But also, I think, from my perspective, the last election were not only election about election or vote for hardcore Hindu nationalism. I think it was more election which was inspired by the wish of having a strong man, yeah? Strong personality. And this was, of course, Modi was a typical representative, but when you look at the states where the BJP was not able to win, you have the same kind of personalities. Yeah? The third one, this would be my answer to this question, but I think I agree to that. And third one is regarding my conclusion to democracy. Yeah, I will look at that. I mean, this is definitely a thing which I have to work on, because, as I mentioned, I'm still restarting my work, and this is a very good input for me, and to look at that and to push my indicators further, because this is really, I have to bridge this thing. I agree with my statement is strong, and I have to compare to the analysis, the concept which I presented here. So I have to work more on that, and perhaps we have a common ground for future project.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Surya, please.
Yeah, there has been heavy focus on Buddhism by Modi because of foreign policy compulsions. Bhutan, Japan, China visit, the Xi Jinping visit. So, do you get any sense that Hindutva will also encompass Buddhism in a sense?
This is a very good question, interesting question. I was also surprised during my study. When you really go into Savarkar's main enemy, focus of his anger, are not the Christians and are not the Muslims. He identified Buddhism as the greatest evil for Hinduism, because for Savarkar, the Christian and Muslims, they were the enemy from outside. But what is more worse, from his concept of building a homogeneous society, the appearance of Buddhism, the conversion of Ashoka, was for him the biggest disaster for Hindus in India. So when you go, there's this one book, the 6 Glorious Epochs of Indian History. This is, from the first page to the last page, a statement against Buddhism. So the real enemy of the Hindu national ideology, as outlined by Savarkar, are the Buddhists.
Yeah, that's why I asked you the question.
Yeah.
Will there be a change?
I mean, I don't think that Prime Minister Modi is so much aware about Savarkar and his reading, his influence in his politics. But I think he's totally focused on the economy policy and tries to somehow improve India's status in the region.
But I think
this is totally economic. There's no ideology involved.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
But I think a caveat is necessary here, right? Savarkar's opposition to Buddhism, if I understand correctly, is about non-violence and peace, and refusal to take up arms by Buddhism that weakens India as a nation. I mean, so for him, the issue with Buddhism is not as such about its philosophical notions, except insofar as its overarching advocacy for non-violence, which he sees as weakening the Indian nation. So if not, he would not incorporate Jains, Buddhists and so on within his construct. But he is opposed to Buddhism because he says this emasculates Hindus. And I think so. I think that there is a limitation to his degree of criticism also.
I want to add this thing. You made this important statement. When you want to understand Savarkar, you have to make clear, and have to be aware Savarkar is a agnostic. I don't want to see he as a non-believer, but he's definitely a strategic agnostic who uses religion, religious rhetoric for political terms to express a political vision, but not more. He's definitely not into religious studies. And Buddhism, because one of this concept of which was much under critic and brought in sharp opposition of Mahatma Gandhi, was this concept of righteous violence. Yeah? So this was a big thing of him. I mean, he was not necessarily promoting or engaging now Indians. We have not to fight against the British, but his point was when the British doesn't leave, you have to at least have the option to use violence. So this was, of course, brought him in contrast, in opposition to the Buddhists. So totally this idea of ahimsa was against him. Although this was for him against all his principles.
Okay, any final question? Okay, if there are not any final question, it's 12 o'clock now. Could we thank our speaker for giving us interesting. Thank you.
And thank you for the pleasure to be here and have such an engaged discussion. And yeah.
Okay, maybe we can proceed outside for some coffee or tea. And before we do, we have a little gift for you from the Institute of South Asian Studies. This is the encyclopedia of the Sri Lankan diaspora.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers.